Hey folks, Wilfie here. There's another video getting uploaded shortly here that's on a very different and very unusual topic for me. And I thought I would record this separately because I really didn't want to mix and match the two topics. And if you go look at the other video when it goes up, you'll understand why. Unpleasant stuff. Nothing bad related to me, just general badness in the world. Anyway, so I have not posted in a long time, and I haven't streamed. I just realized I don't think I have live streamed in 10 months, and that's bad. I do still have designs on getting back into live streaming, and I'm taking some steps to get there. And that's part of what this video is about. We are going to geek out. So, on the Ceph cluster front, I have been slowly assembling equipment for building my cluster. And while I was at it, I'll explain what this is here in a minute. While I was at it, I realized how good and how inexpensive this equipment is. So I decided, since I'm in the middle of doing all this anyway, I might as well just redo my whole home network and actually build myself a decent lab. Because this stuff turned out to be much less expensive than I expected it to be. And again, I'll get to the specific hardware details here in a bit. I've got a couple other things here. Come here, you. These are actually the same pieces of hardware. One is just the rack mount version of the other. But they are functionally no difference. Although I just noticed, I guess the little one up on top has a dedicated serial management port, and the bigger guy does not. But otherwise, they're functionally identical. The bigger one, of course, is rack mount sized, and it came with mounting brackets. So if I ever do get a 19-inch rack, I can just pop him up there. And the other piece here, if I can unplug this and avoid breaking that. Uh-oh. You'd think I might have prepared for this video, but nah, that's not how we do things at Casa de la Wilpi. Come here, you. Let go. Okay. Little dingle dangle. Come here. This. Screw that back on. Put you back on. Poke you up. Okay, right. Ting. So this is the other piece that I've got. And there is one more component coming that will complete the hardware acquisition portion of this project. And this will give you a clue. No, that won't. That might. This will be better, though. Behold, fiber optic cable. Ooh. So, the one piece left that has not arrived yet is it's a simple, well, it's a brother of these guys. It's the same form factor as the beast I'm thumbing right here, Giggity. And it happens to be a 10 gigabit, it's a switch that has 8 10 gigabit ports on it. They're all SPF cages or SPF plus cages. So it can do, and it's got a gigabit port as well, so it's got 9 ports total. So it can do, and they benchmarked it and showed that the hardware can actually do it. It can do switching at wire speed on all ports all at once. So because it's 80 gigabit total plus 1 gigabit 81, and then it can do full duplex traffic, so it's 162 gigabits of switching capacity, and they benchmarked it and proved that it could do it. All of these pieces of equipment, this whole stack is under 500 bucks. The little router up on top, the Wi-Fi router, $100. The switch that I'm the switch that I'm thumbing, that was 180 shipped, and this bottom jobby about the same, 180 shipped. Now let's get back over here before I drop this stuff. Get over there. Hi, Blue. Oh, it's going to last 5 minutes. I just don't want the cats to knock that stuff over. So it was hard to get. Um, oh yeah. So anyway, the stuff is just crazy fast and crazy cheap and crazy good. Those little gadgets that cost sub $200 a pop have enough raw speed in them and good enough hardware that they actually compete with mid-level Cisco and Juniper gear that costs 10 times as much. The company that makes these things is called Microtik, and they've been around a long time. And I was reading about them. I think just randomly their name came up a few months ago, and I started looking into them, and I realized, holy crap, they make some good gear. So I put the 24 port, the big rack mount router, the switch rather, on my Christmas wish list. And my mother actually managed to find one new and had it shipped to me. And then when I started messing with it, it absolutely blew me away at how fast it was, how fast and configurable it is, how much it can do, and how cheap it was. And it's low power too. It doesn't take much electricity. In fact, oh good, yeah. So I to power these things, of course they each come with, where did that go? God damn it. They each come with a power brick. Hell with it. And the power brick runs 1 unit. But all I had to do was get a 90 watt, their standard barrel size. So, what, 5.5 millimeter to 2.1 millimeter positive center, negative barrel. I just got a 90 watt, 12 volt standard AC adapter for $10, made of Chinesium, shipped from Amazon, and a fan out cable. Just a little thing. You plug this into the power supply, and you've got 4 outputs. These things sip power. All 4 of them can be driven. Now they're going to be in different parts of the house, so that won't work. But they, you can drive them all off of one AC adapter, and it's incredible. And then not even exceed or come close to hitting the limit on the AC adapter. The other cool thing is they're so low power that they can support power over Ethernet. So you can actually power the damn things over the Ethernet wire, which is really, really cool. And I even recommended these things at work because we're setting up something really cool and new and didn't have any hardware for it. So they're really excited because the like that 24 port one sitting there, they make a fancier version of it that does PoE over all the ports. And so obviously it takes more power because it's got to deliver power to a bunch of other gadgets. But yeah, so it can do that all over the wire, and you can control it, tell it individually per port, don't send power or do send power. And these individual units, they don't provide PoE over every port, but they do on one port, which essentially means in some cases you can actually daisy chain these things together and drive them off a single power connection. And that's pretty cool. That's not going to be my use case, but it is really nice that it can do that. So I will be using 3 of the 4 barrels on this cable because the smaller of the 2 routers you saw, plus the Wi-Fi router, and then the 8-port 10 gigabit router is coming, and that'll all land on my desk here. So that's going to be in this room, in my office. So I'll be driving all of them off of one power adapter, and that's pretty slick stuff. And it's still going to use less than 50 watts, which is incredible. And so I'm replacing all of my existing network equipment with this stuff because it's just so much faster. The trouble with Microtik is that and this isn't a strike against them, it's just the way things landed. They are based out of Latvia. And I'll give you one guess who their neighbors are. And one of them starts with U and ends with Crane. The other is the motherland, Russia. So they're having some fun right now. They are not directly involved in that unpleasantness, but they're right next door. So, Latvia's kind of sitting there going, "Shit, this is going to get ugly." Uh, and yeah, so as you can imagine, shipments to and from that country are a little bit on the flaky side. And between that and the Wu flu screwing up the supply chain for the past couple of years, and the chip shortage that's happening, Microtik has been telling people to expect between 6 and 8 months of lead time between when you order their hardware and it starts shipping. Now, before you declare that that's god awful and they must be a terrible company, they're actually doing better than Cisco and HP and Dell, who are telling their customers that it could be up to 2 years between receiving an order and actually shipping a unit. Blue, come here, bud. So, the fact that I managed to find a dealer in Latvia actually who was willing to take uh, an American credit card through and charged me dollars, not euro or anything. Say hi to Blue, everybody. This is Blue. Blue's a good cat. Mwah. Good boy. um, so yeah, the two of these pieces of equipment are coming straight from Latvia, including the one that was sent for Christmas, and that was an amazing experience because FedEx notified me as soon as it shipped because I'm registered and they have my address. And it took like 2 weeks to get here. And the most nail biting part of that wait is that as soon as it leaves the shipping area or the local carrier facility in Latvia and its next stop is Germany, as soon as it lands in Germany, it takes a while for one thing to get from Latvia to Germany. But then once it gets there, it hits operational delay. And that's like, oh God, what now? And because they're the rest of the world is like shitting its pants over the Ukraine Russia thing, and everybody is just taking advantage of that situation, taking every opportunity to just screw with people. And there's a lot of guilt by association going on, especially because it can be argued that a lot of people in the Ukraine, not the Ukraine, sorry, I hate doing that. People in the Ukraine, I did it again. Wow. Stop that, Wilfie. You're educated better than that. About half of Ukraine's population can trace its heritage directly back to Russia. And that population in Ukraine is kind of evenly split between Ukraine is its own thing, we live here, we are Ukrainian, fuck off Russia. The other half thinks, hang on, this is Russia's where we came from. What are we doing here? And of course, that leads to lots of conflict, and that in turn leads to a bunch of guilt by association. So, any of the Slavic countries, all of the Slavic countries, excuse me, are having some trouble getting stuff out of their countries. People, refugees, uh, civilians, equipment, you name it. So, it's hard to get stuff out of there. The what is it? The 8-port 10 gigger is still stuck in operational delay land. Oh, you are so cute. Yes, you are. But it should be here probably about a week from now. Um, the last time that something hit that operational delay, it took like 3 or 4 days to clear. And I'm guessing that's going to be something customs related. Quite possibly the United States being dickheads about it, just because of the shipment's origin. But who knows? The world works very slowly for the plebs. But once that stuff arrives, I'm going to have a field day rejiggering my entire network. And and I will get to the details here in a bit because there is yet another project brewing that is going to go alongside all of this effort to revamp the network. And all of this is in service of building the Ceph cluster and getting it done right. Um, but the other major piece of surgery is my PC, which has been being a jerk for a good probably a year and a half, to be honest. It's been a while. And I made a discovery about 3 weeks ago about how it's put together, how I built it. This is totally my fault. that has essentially contributed to probably a good chunk of that instability and some performance woes. I'm very happy with the performance of this PC overall. It gets a little bit flaky when it's under heavy load, and that has consistently been bothering me pretty bad for the last couple of months. And so I started digging around, and I made the discovery as I was reading. There's there It's an Asus motherboard, and I bought it I think 4 or 5 years ago. Whenever Ryzen's the second series of Ryzen was out, like Ryzen 2000 series was just first coming out, and it's a B350 chipset, so the first, and or one of the first. And as it turns out, they're still releasing new firmware for it. I was kind of impressed. There's Asus released a firmware just earlier this year, in fact. So like, wow, good job, guys. They're still supporting this thing. And it adds support for, I think, the newest AM4 chip, which I think is Zen 3. I think they said Zen 4 is going to be a different socket finally, but Zen 3 it can support. And so the BIOS updates include support for the newer chips, which is just awesome. Well, it got me to reading the user's manual, just so I could make sure I knew how to flash the thing right. And I came across a little asterisk on the bit that talks about the configuration of the PCI slots. It's got it's got three full-length PCI 3.0 slots. You obviously put the video card in the top one, the one closest to the CPU, and that's 16 lanes, or PCI X16. And then the next one right under that is a 1X single lane slot, but that typically gets covered up by a graphics card, because they're super thick, so you never get to use that slot. The slot directly below that is another 1X, and that one is available. Then below that is the next 16X slot. Now, here's where it gets interesting. It's intended for you to plop down a second video card in that slot, and that's why they designed the chipset the way they did. And what happens is it's an 8X slot, not 16, and when you put two GPUs together on this motherboard, I don't think you have to bridge them anymore. There's no physical connection between the two cards, but even the 16X slot drops to 8X. The idea being the cards work together, and so that bandwidth is going to get split between them, and GPU heavy loads are going to be offloaded to those GPUs. The bandwidth isn't as important as the raw performance of both cards. Fine, makes sense. Now, unfortunately, even if you put it doesn't matter if you don't put anything you put in that slot, sorry, will make the first slot switch to 8X mode. Oops. And as it turns out, there's another configuration quibble that came up, and I'll explain that here. So that fourth slot is 16X physically, but it's only an 8X slot. Below that is another 1X slot, and below that is a full length, but also I think only 8X. It might even be 1X. I feel like it's 8X though. Anyway, so there's 6 slots. The motherboard also has 6 SATA ports. SATA 2, so there's 6 gigabit ports, and there's 6 of them. Did I mention 6? Because that's one more than my hand can show. And my other hand is busy. It also has an onboard M.2 socket for those little tiny SSDs, NVMe PCI support for internal storage. Well, I didn't know that when I first bought the machine and built the whole thing up. I just used regular, 2.5-inch SSDs. And then I learned about a year later, hey, wait a minute, this has an M2 slot. I could use that for the system disk. Okay, cool. And I bought a 2 terabyte SSD that fits in that format. And I happily popped it into the motherboard and turned the machine on. I cloned the disk and all that stuff worked. It worked fine. And then I noticed, and I rebooted back into the OS, and everything was happy and hunky-dory. And then I notice, wait a minute, one of my hard disks isn't listed. And so I spent some time troubleshooting it, and I was starting to get a little pissed because, like, great, I broke something or something dead. And come to find out, again, in the manual, if you put something in the M2 socket, it disables the last two SATA ports. It just turns them off and you can't use them. So what that meant, I only have one disk attached there, but it made that disk go offline because those ports got turned off. Well, fantastic. So, being the clever person I am, I went out and I found and ordered a PCI socket or a PCI card that's got an M2 socket on it. Right? No, that's thinking, right? It's a $20 card. It's essentially just a PCI bridge. There shouldn't be any performance hit, or if there is, it'll be negligible. And as it turned out, there wasn't. I benchmarked it, and it's right up there at the usual NVMe speed, so it's fine. Popped it in that middle slot. That's 8x electrically, but 16x physically. So I put my system disk in that slot, but putting something in that slot cuts the bandwidth to the GPU in half. So I've been running. Now that brought my disks back. I got all the storage I wanted. But, of course, that means my GPU has been running at essentially half speed for like 2 or 3 years. So all the live streaming I've been doing, as good as the performance is, it's been hobbled. It's cut in half compared to what it could be. It's just so aggravating. I cannot believe I've been running like this for like 2 years. I'm such an idiot. So that prompted a little bit of soul searching and looking for a solution to the problem. And I have I have arrived at the fix. And let me look here. I'm embarrassed to say I've actually forgotten everything I ordered. So I'm going to go through the list here. Because yes, I must bore you with the banalities of Wilfie's life. So, I ordered a bunch of cool stuff. Where is it? Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. So, I ordered the real problem. Well, there's two problems actually. One of the other slots, the other slot, in fact, in the PC has my AverMedia capture card for the Switch and other HDMI inputs, and so that needs to stay. And then finally, there's another card in the final slot for the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth adapter that's in the PC, so that I can use Bluetooth devices. And because the USB ports on the top of this thing are kind of falling apart. It's the case that's being stupid. The case is ancient. It's the second build I've used this case for, so it's okay. And then Wi-Fi is actually handy on the rare times when my broadband goes out. I can tether my phone and just turn on Wi-Fi mobile hotspot, and boom, PC comes right up, and it's pretty nice. So that needs to stay too. In short, and finally, you notice I've been mentioning with this network revamp, 10 gigabit network, right? Well, my PC only has gigabit Ethernet, so it's time I gotta pop in a 10 gigabit card. So there is a free slot for it, I think. Yes, there is. Sorry, that would be the reason I'm doing this whole thing. So there's a free slot for it, but it has to go in the bottom slot because it only needs. The crazy thing is, it only needs a 1x single PCI lane because I think that's what 12 or 18 gigabits. So it's more than one lane is more than enough to support 10 gigabit networking, and that's half duplex. So the lane can handle it at full speed, both directions. So 1x is just fine, but it cannot like that. I have to leave that that other 8x slot empty. so that my GPU can actually get all 16 lanes and actually run at full speed. So what has to happen is that system disk has to come out of that PCI slot, and that adapter has to go away and free up the slot. And so the system disk needs to go on the motherboard in the M2 slot. Well, that's going to kill one of my SATA disks. So I ordered, I've got 3 8 terabyte spinning rust disks in the machine. And one of them is one of those, this is back before I even knew what shingled magnetic recording is. But one of them is an 8 terabyte Seagate that does that shingled crap. And what that does is it makes it really ungodly slow for writes anyway. And then the other disk, one of the other 8 terabyte disks, is starting to show some smart warnings. So it's kind of in yellow condition. So those both need to be replaced anyway. So I ordered an 18 terabyte Enterprise Toshiba disk, 3.5 inch form factor, and I'm just going to use that to replace these two. So that's going to free up and let me take the 5th SATA device off. So it won't matter that port goes away. It's just going to not be used, and I'm only going to have 4 devices to pop into SATA. I have 2 SSDs, and then I'll have 2 spinning disks, and then the NVMe is going to be on the motherboard. That should drastically improve performance, and I'll pop in that 10 gigabit card. I won't lose any functionality, things will get faster, and I'll have a reliable disk again instead of 2 aging 8 terabyte disks. And I also bought some thermal grease, or thermal compound, I guess they call it now. Since I'm going to have the PC open anyway, I think it's probably overdue for a quick disassemble, clean all the parts, clean it up, dust it out, put down some new thermal grease, and put her back together, and just kind of give her a tune-up of sorts. So yeah, that's going to be a fun escapade. So I've got a PC rebuild, essentially, and then a complete network rebuild. And then that's going to put me in great shape to finally build out this Ceph cluster. So you're probably wondering, why on earth am I bothering with 10 gigabit when all of these Odroids that I'm building the Ceph cluster on only support 1 gigabit? They've only got a 1 gigabit interface, and just the one. And technically speaking, they do have a USB 3 port, which can do, I believe, wait, no, it can't. Never mind. It can't go that fast. So yeah, gigabit port's the fastest they can do. So what's the point of flipping over to a 10 gigabit network? Well, there's 2 neat things about modern Ethernet or modern network switches. For one thing, just aside from that, my desktop is going to have a 10 gigabit link. My NAS already has a 10 gigabit link because I installed one along with it. It was part of a combo card when I added the cache, the extra SSD cache to the NAS. The adapter also has an SPF plus cage, which is 10 gigabit Ethernet. So just those two alone, my desktop talking to my NAS at 10 gigabit speeds, that's going to be a killer feature. But there's also something else really cool about modern networking gear. And actually, this has been something they've been able to do for probably 30 or 40 years. So you can run a you can run a gigabit network successfully with all devices that run at 1 gigabit, and they can all talk to each other at 1 gigabit speeds. And the cool thing about it is that you can also attach a device that only speaks 100 megabit or even 10 megabits, like really slow ass stuff. You can still connect those directly to a modern switch or hub, and they will auto negotiate the right speed. And the devices will route packets and switch them at the right speed so that even the 10 megabit device can talk at its full speed, 10 megabits, to other systems on the network. And the other systems don't have to know. They don't care. They're like, well, this one's only taking about 10 megabits a second. Whatever, it must be a slow device. We're fine. So every other device on the network doesn't care how slow individual nodes are. It all just works. And it turns out the same is true with 10 gigabit switches and routers. The other cool thing about modern network switching is the whole point of a switch that makes it smarter than a hub. A hub is basically just an Ethernet thing that's got a bunch of ports on it, and whatever you send down one of the ports gets broadcast to all the other ports. Simplest kind of network you can build, and also the slowest. That makes hubs pretty cheap. The thing is, they suck, because, two devices talking to each other at 1 gigabit, your whole network's saturated. Good luck trying to get good speeds out of a third device, because they're hogging all the bandwidth. A switch, and by the way, pretty much anything built after 2010 is a switch. Even the stuff that you buy for $30 from TP-Link or D-Link, consumer grade gear, that's all switches. So they do this cool thing I'm about to describe. Say you have an 8-port switch, and one of the ports is connected to your Wi-Fi router, which is connected to your cable modem. So that's your internet connection. That's in port 1 of your switch. And let's also say that you have 7 other gadgets. Or let's make it 6 other gadgets to make this example more complex. Computers, printers, whatever they are, they're directly plugged into that switch, and they're all gigabit devices. Now, if they talk to each other, they're on the same switch. The switch has enough horsepower that it can, the internal switching thing is called the fabric, and that's the piece that handles conversations between all the ports. A switch has enough guts in it, or enough oomph, that 2 devices directly connected to the switch talking to each other can directly talk to each other. The packets they send back and forth just go across the fabric to those 2 devices. Other devices on the network can, if they want, ask to see it. It's called promiscuous mode. But normally that's turned off, and so other devices still have a gigabit network that they can talk to each other with. So if ports 3 and 4 are talking to each other, and ports 5 and 6 are talking to each other, both pairs get full duplex 1 gigabit speeds because of the way the switch works. Now, the other cool part, let's say the device on port 7 is doing a bunch of internet traffic. It's downloading porn or whatever, and say you've got gigabit internet, so you're pulling down stuff at like 11 megabytes per second. Great shit. Or no, make that 110. What am I doing? The internet link from the cable modem down to the regular router, down to your switch, and down to port 7, that's going to get a gigabit of bandwidth to and from, even as that heavy traffic is happening between 4 different nodes on that same switch. Next, I mentioned that 8th port. Let's say that's connected to a different switch just down the hall in a different room. Here's where this gets even more cool, or even cooler, I guess. Let's say that that is an identical switch, 50 feet away, and it's in its own room. There's a bunch of shit attached to it too. Now, it's connected to the first switch with one gigabit cable on one port. Port 8 on this switch, port 1 on the switch down the road. So that's a maximum of 1 gigabit back and forth. That's as fast as it's going to go. So now, let's say that port 2 on the main switch, the first one, it's idle. Now port 7 is busy downloading from the internet. Ports 3, 4, 5, and 6 are talking amongst themselves at full wire speed. Now you got a couple gadgets sitting in the other office, say ports 2 and 3, and they're chatting with each other like crazy. So again, 10 meg or a gigabit, full duplex, full speed. Now you got gadget number 4. Well, gadget number 4 on port 4 in the other room wants to talk to the gadget on port 2 on this switch, even though every single port apart from 2 and 8 are going full blast at gigabit speeds. And even though there's activity on the other switch, ports 2 and 3 are babbling back at each other, back and forth at a gigabit each. Port 4, which wants to talk at best possible speeds to port 2 on this one, they get gigabit speed because that switch over there is doing the same magic this one is. So the two gadgets attached to that switch there, they're just talking locally. That's not even hitting the wire coming to this room. Port 4, which wants to talk to port 2 over here, that gets the entire port 1 to port 8 wire because nothing else is using it. So it gets a gigabit of bandwidth between the two switches. It gets the whole thing. And because port 2 on this switch is idle, it gets gigabit speeds. And so even though there is just completely saturated traffic going back and forth between every port on this switch, plus 4 active ports on the other switch, you're talking, what is that, 80 plus 40. So yeah, 120 gigabits of data is moving back and forth on a gigabit Ethernet network because switches are that powerful now and that clever and smart. It's really awesome. And that kind of thing is measured inside a switch as they call that wire rate switching. So when you have a switch that's got 8 ports on it and they're all gigabit, a bragging point now, some consumer gear doesn't do that, or it can't quite hit those top speeds. If you've got a 4-port router that does Wi-Fi and that sort of thing, you've only got the 4 gigabit ports, you've got your dual band radio, and you've probably got a 5th port for internet. You're probably going to get wire speed on all of those ports because there's just 4 or 5. So you don't need, the hardware for that is really cheap. When you get to more ports than that, like 8, you're pushing your luck. But these big MikroTik switches, they've got, like you saw, 24 gigabit ports plus 2 10 gigabit ports. And oh, sorry, Blue. Oh, and I forgot. It's full duplex. So the fabric, even on an 8-port switch, at 1 gigabit per direction. Wow, I did screw all those numbers up, so ignore me. You got 1 gigabit per, and then full duplex it, so 2 gigabits per port. So that means to do wire speed for all 8 ports, that switch has to be able to handle 16 gigabits of packet movement over its fabric. And so a lot of routers can do that, or switches can do that. When you get up to bigger ones like these MikroTiks with 24 ports plus some gigabit or 10 gigabit ports, you're looking at the 24 times 2, so that's 48 gigabits that it's got to handle, plus 20 times 2, so 40 more. So you're looking at about 84 gigabits of routable of bandwidth speed that it needs to be able to switch. These MikroTiks can do it. And the router that's got 8 10 gigabit ports plus the 9th 1 gigabit, that sucker can move 162 megabits per second. Or gigabits, excuse me. So these are some beefy switches, and they only cost a couple $100. Now, the reason I explain all of this crap is that excuse me. Yes, I'm a milk drinker. That's why this is so important. The Ceph nodes themselves can only talk at 1 gigabit full duplex at most. But the switch that they're all attached to is smart enough to do that magic, wire speed switching over the fabric. So if 2 Ceph nodes need to talk to each other, they can do so at gigabit speeds at full blast, and they don't interfere with the other nodes in the cluster talking to each other because they all get dedicated bandwidth on the fabric. Now, that network itself, with those what's going to amount to 12 nodes sitting on one switch, it's going to be linked to the main house network by a 10 gigabit link. So that means any client that wants to talk to the Ceph cluster over the main network, it gets 10 gigabits of bandwidth to talk to the Ceph cluster. So if you're just running a 1 gigabit client on the main network, you're not going to notice any difference. But if you're running a 10 gigabit client, you can actually, if what you're requesting involves enough nodes, you can actually get faster than 1 gigabit speeds out of a Ceph cluster that's composed of a bunch of $50 bitty computers that are barely powerful enough to run it. How cool is that? And all this gear can do it. So, yeah, this Ceph project is getting beefier and more complex. But we're in the home stretch now, and I'm almost. I have to wait for that last switch to get here, and once it does, I can start putting equipment in their final spots and actually start setting things up for real. And first step will be swapping out rebuilding the network, getting everything working, my firewall and everything moved over. Second step will be rebuilding the PC to get the 10 gigabit interface working and all those performance fixes and all that crap. And third will be assembling the Ceph cluster and getting it up and running and then starting some performance tests. I haven't tested this because until now, I didn't have any 10 gigabit equipment. But I get the feeling this is going to be fairly fast. It's not going to be a supercomputer caliber cluster because, I can't afford that kind of gear. But it's still going to be interesting to see it all work, and I still think we're going to get better than 1 gigabit speeds out of the cluster. So that's where things stand. As I get closer to that, I will post updates. Shouldn't take too long. I hope to have it done this week if the Switch arrives. It's got to get out of customs hell first. I may actually start with the PC rebuild first and maybe do the network second. Whatever. I've also got to clean the house today too because it's trash day tomorrow. Life never gets easier, does it? But that's okay. Keeps it interesting. That's it for me for now, guys. It's enough hardware spurging for a long while. Thanks for sitting through all this, and I will keep everyone posted on progress. As far as live streaming goes, I keep saying it, and I keep not doing it, but I do really want to get back into it. And so we'll see what the next few weeks hold in terms of getting that going. So, right. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and I will catch you next time.